Hi guys, what's up? I just had my SPJIMR interview and it was one of my best interviews of the season. And in this video, I'll tell you exactly how the day unfolded and how you can maximize your chances in GI1 and in GI2. And if you've already given the interview, maybe you can use this as a yardstick to determine whether your interview went well or not. I reached at 7:30 a.m. and at 7:45 a.m. sharp, which was my slot, the signing in began. Within 15 minutes, we were done, and then we were taken to our case study room where we were briefed about what the case study was going to be about. And then, about 10 to 15 minutes, we were waiting, and then we were distributed the sheets. And for around 20-25 minutes is the time that you get to read the case study. Essentially, what the case was about was this EU-based renewables company that specialized in wind farms and smart grid technology and so on. They were doing well until Trump started saying that climate change was a hoax. And now basically this company faced two dilemmas because they were cost effective. They were wondering whether they should pivot their strategy and their messaging to say that we are more cost effective for data centers, or whether they should still stick to that, the fact that they are greener and better for the environment and so on. This was essentially what the case was about. I'll give a longer description of the case in the description below that you can check out if you feel like. But here's the thing. In those 20 to 25 minutes, you're not allowed to write anything or take any photographs or document the case in any way. You have to remember the case. So for that, I would recommend read the case about 4 or 5 times and then try to reason with yourself about what you should do or what you should not do in the first 10-15 minutes or so. And then after that, close your eyes and try to remember the case again. This will take maybe 2 or 3 attempts until you sort of develop some kind of a photographic memory of the case. And once you are done and you leave the case interview, narrate the entire case to ChatGPT and ask it to summarize it all together, and you can ask it for key pointers and figures and stuff like that. This is the best way to ensure you remember the case, because the case is not discussed in GI1, it's discussed in GI2, which will happen maybe 2 to 3 hours after you are done reading the case. So you have to remember everything. Once we were done reading this case around 9 a.m., we were escorted to our panels for GI1. In my panel, there were 3 people from information management, 1 person from operations, and 1 person from marketing. That was me. Which was kind of funny because most of my undergraduation subjects and my work experience was relating to information management, but even then I was given marketing, which was my second preference. I also had the call for their second program, which is their BM or business management. Our panel had one female professor whose domain was HR and one male professor whose domain was strategy, and I think he was from the consulting background. Once we all greeted the panel and sat down, then we were all told to go one by one and answer these 3 questions one after another. The first question was, tell me about yourself. The second question was, why MBA? And the third question was, what our goals are post MBA. Pretty simple stuff that all of you, I'm sure, must have prepared for. And then after we went one by one, we were sometimes cross-questioned on what we were saying and sort of 1 or 2 levels deeper about whether we actually knew what we were talking about or not. It was nothing particularly intense. They were just trying to get to know us a bit better. And also, one panelist was smiling throughout and one panelist had a sort of, a straight face or a poker face, you can say. A large majority of the interview was work experience focused because everyone in my panel had about 18 to 24, 26 months of experience. So it was largely focused on that. 2 people from my panel happened to be from the cybersecurity background. So that's the first thing that the panelists picked up. And they were asked a few questions about cybersecurity and what it is and whether it's useful or not. And then the panelists gave us a hypothetical scenario saying that, say, for example, all 5 of us are working in a cybersecurity company, and then we were sort of asked different questions based on our field. I was asked, for example, how I would market it and whether AI and cybersecurity has any influence on marketing in general and how it's evolved over time and so on. There was a person from operations and they were asked whether cybersecurity is even necessary for operations or whether that's something we need to be worried about in the future. That person obviously said, sir, it's extremely vital, and then he proceeded to justify it. Whenever any of us use technical terms, like the person from operations mentioned Industry 4.0, then they were asked more about those technical terms to sort of probe whether we actually knew what we were talking about or not. After this hypothetical scenario, the rest of the interview was largely work experience focused. We were asked one by one in a sort of a random order about different questions from our work experience. I come from a family business background, so I was asked about how I'm using marketing in my family business, what the business is about, what are the various metrics I use to see whether a digital marketing campaign is successful or unsuccessful, and so on. And again, cross questioning about what you're saying. It's nothing too intense, but you have to know what you're talking about. A key insight is that this is a GI, it's a group interview and not a GD. And this is something that the panel had told us when we had entered, that the amount of time you talk for doesn't matter, what you are saying is what matters. This is something that I noticed in the people that were my fellow interviewees, is that some of them tend to ramble on for a bit long. They were repeating points, they were unclear in what they were saying, and they were not crisp. And those are the people that happen to not be selected for the next round. There was a person from IM right next to me, and most of his answers were about 30 to 45 seconds, extremely crisp, and he made it to the next round as well. So try to be crisp and try not to dominate or cut over others. Be clear in what you're saying and take some second to think about it. In some situations, even the panel said, you know what, I'm going to give you a minute, think about it. Until then, I'll ask someone else their question and then I'll circle back to you until you've thought about it. Especially in situations like these, you can't ramble on. GI1 was largely technical and work experience focused. Once this interview went on for about an hour or so, after that, the panel asked us if we had any questions for them, and they gave a very important caveat that I think is useful across interviews. They said, don't ask us any questions that coaching institutes have told you to ask us. And they said, we, like most other interviewers of various elite B schools, know what are the coaching prepared answers, and we get those questions time and time again. So only ask us questions if you really have them, and don't do any zabardasti, because there are no brownie points for the questions. But if you ask a bad question, then we'll definitely cut marks. After GI1, around 10:15ish, we were taken to the break area. The SPJIMR campus is really pretty, and we were given sandwiches and tea and coffee, which was fresh. And this is the time that you can speak to your other panelists, ask them for feedback about how your interview went, how you can improve, and even other groups. This is a really relaxed time where everyone is still scared because in half an hour, the results were announced. This is also the time where I discussed the case that was going to happen in GI2 with panelists and figure out, how we should structure it and how we can all answer better things. In my panel, out of 5 people, 3 people were selected, and I saw a wide range of selections. In some panels, only one person was selected, and in some panels, only one person was rejected. So it largely depends on your own contributions and not on the panel as a whole. And at around 11 a.m., we were taken to our second GI panel, and we were sitting there with students who are currently students of SPJIMR and part of the ADCOM currently. And they told us that for GI2, what's most important is that you're yourself. Don't try to put up a mask or a face, because eventually, as the interview progresses, that mask will come down, and the panelists who are very experienced and who've been at SPJN for 10 plus years will realize that. In GI2 as well, the first round was tell me about yourself, and everyone was asked 1 or 2 questions depending on what they said. After that, 40% of the remaining time was about the case that we were given at the start of the day. Again, this was not a GD. Everyone got to share their opinions in somewhat of a sequential order, and whatever they said, there was cross questioning on that. This is the trend that I've noticed across SPJIMR interviews, is that you have to be sure about what you'll say, because they'll go 1 level or 2 levels deeper depending on what you're saying only. So don't try to faff something that you're not fully sure about. They were trying to evaluate depth, structure, the ability to stand your ground, and whether your points actually added value. And I could see them visibly getting annoyed when certain of my fellow interviews were rambling on more than they should have, again, repeating points. And I do have a tendency to ramble as well. So whenever I noticed that I was just speaking for the sake of speaking and I was not able to structure my thoughts clearly, I would try to cut it short and summarize and say thank you. Then the rest of the 40% of the interview was about the ethical dilemma that they gave us. The dilemma was that we are the CEO of a company that is on the verge of shutting down. We have about 100 employees that are working with us and various stakeholders whose livelihoods are at stake. We are one order away from being completely shut down. And we are in talks with this one order from this person who wants a bribe to be able to successfully execute that order. They want a 10% bribe. Whether we will give that bribe or not and thus shut down our company was the ethical dilemma that we had to work through. This round had heavy cross questioning. Everyone was asked one by one about what they would do and how they would deal with the situation. The best thing here is to not take a structured stance saying that I will do this or I will do that, but try to be diplomatic and make sure that your entire process is shown. The result is not important. How you are evaluating the different processes is much more important. I was asked to go at the very end of this. All 4 people who were with me had already shared the responses. So I was able to luckily structure a very nice response and all. I divided this in the following segments. First, I said that I would try to evaluate if there are any other options at all in the market. Are there other competitors that we can reach out to and execute those orders? Are there other customers in the market? Is there any other funding that I can pick up, and so on? And that is the first best case scenario that I will figure out. If that's not available, and if this is the only order and it's do or die from here, then I will evaluate in the following responses. If they are a sole proprietor or a partner, then they are drawing profits directly from the company. So the 10% for them doesn't make as much of a difference, and I would rather have that 10% documented on paper. Instead of giving them under the table, I'll make it say 12% or 13% and make it documented on paper itself. This is the easier route. The more difficult conundrum is if this person is, say, in the procurement team, or is the chief marketing officer or the chief sourcing officer or something like that in a larger company. Then it becomes difficult to identify what to do. Then I said that I will speak to this person and try to reason with them and say that we want to build a long-term relationship with them, and something like that would not really emphasize long-term growth. And if this person is still not agreeing, then I would try to identify who is in this hierarchy that is not part of this corruption, and I would speak to them, because nobody really wants people like these in the industry, or at least especially someone superior would not want someone under them, skimming off the top. I was cross-questioned heavily on this. I was asked, how will you identify if someone is part of the corruption or not? What if the entire organization is corrupt? What if everybody wants money and everyone is taking a cut? Then I was trying to defend that, and they were saying, no, this doesn't make sense and all of that. So there was heavy cross-questioning here. They were very polite throughout, but the cross-questioning was rampant. At the end, they asked if any of us had any questions. All of us had a couple of questions which he asked, and then we left. Honestly, at that point, none of us was sure exactly how it went, because the panelists had a sort of poker face throughout. But after reflecting on it for a few hours, I feel largely satisfied with how the discussion was. I feel like I was, in spite of the cross questioning, somewhat able to display a holistic picture of myself. Now, whether or not I convert is, I guess only left up to time, but I feel at least maybe, an 85-90% chance that I'll convert. So fingers crossed. If you're watching this before the end of March, obviously you don't know if I have converted or not. And if you're watching this post-March, once SPJIMR results have come out, I'll put it in the description below. And it'll be really ironic. I've said 85-90%, and if I don't convert, then it'll be really sad. And I'll let you know that in the description below as well. And here are my final thoughts. Honestly, this is one of the best conducted interviews of the entire season. The food was good, the panelists were really sweet, and they got serious when they needed to get serious. But the best touch, I think, is that there were students, current students, throughout the entire process. They were giving us advice, calming down our nerves and so on during the entire day. And you could really see that they were happy to be at SPJIMR, and you could see the culture reflecting through the students. And I think anyone that goes for this interview experience will realize that SPJIMR is a good place to be. Students are very happy, they're getting good results, and the entire ethos of the campus felt very positive and very lively. Other people were asked questions from their Form B or their first form. That didn't happen with me throughout the interview process, but you never know what you're asked. So be very clear. All in all, I'd rate my experience maybe 9 on 10 for this one. It was one of the good ones. And there are a few interviews still left, so subscribe and follow along. Let's go.